Don't mind the fact that I'm driving.
Hello, everybody. Hello, hello, welcome, everybody.
I'll just moderate. I'll let people in while you guys talk until I'm home. I'm like 5 minutes away.
Ignore Dustin. He's not driving. He's being driven. We're just going to give folks like a minute or two to log on in. Like always, we really enjoy hearing where you're kind of tuning in from. So send us a chat and let us know where you're from and what you're drinking. Looks like I got a visitor today. This is Izzy.
Oh, so sweet.
She just busted into the room. Let me take her out.
Oh, okay. Luke, have you been getting in the hives over there?
Yeah, we've been doing hive inspections for our hives that are just kind of out and around. We've seen just a little bit of some hives that are getting just a little bit of honey bound, and so some of the things we were doing with the hives that were honey bound with that had 2 deeps was we were on some of them we were actually looking at adding a 3rd deep just to give them that extra space.
I know I kind of had a similar dilemma, but since I'm trying to harvest honey, and I have these new plastic foundation undrawn frames, I'm worried that if I just put those on, they're not going to draw it out.
Oh, I could see that. Yeah, I could see where you'd be wanting to try to draw them out as much as you can. We have been putting, of course, extra supers on too, like an additional super so that they have those space. And we have been making a point to like where we do add the extra super to make sure that generally to add it to where it has drawn comb, for them to put the honey in there right away. Because yeah, it does seem like if it's not drawn, they're looking for some place to put it. So yeah, I can see if you don't have a honey super that's undrawn, I can see where they'd probably try to put that in the deep if it was drawn.
Yeah, they're just putting it wherever they have space.
Yeah, they really do. So yeah, it's definitely trying to kind of, it's a task to just try to get ahead of the game there.
How late in the Midwest, as someone who's new to honey production, how late is too late to get your honey supers on? Because I just got an email today from someone saying that they hoped to start putting their honey supers on in the next week or 2. And in my mind, that seems pretty late. It's a first-year beekeeper.
Yeah, it depends. Because if it's a first-year beekeeper, it takes them so long to get the comb drawn out and, get the colony started. And we're finding that it really also depends on the timing of when you get your packages. So we got our packages, we got 2 sets of packages, right? So one was picked up early. We try to get a set of packages before our workshop so that people can see what to do before they get their bees in. So we try to get the earliest package dates we can, and sometimes we even go out of state to do that. But the packages we got in April are significantly bigger and stronger and producing honey like in supers compared to the packages we hived at the end of the month, just 3-4 weeks later, because they had to draw out wax while the honey flow was on. And while the ones in April were fed, and they drew out wax and they just kind of built up. And then when honey flow came on, they had the comb and they were ready and they had the workers. So we're finding that the timing of when you get your packages, and if you need to draw out new comb, the earlier the better, because when honey flow starts, they plug it up so fast.
Yeah, And they're not that. So feeding sugar syrup should kind of, in the early spring, should kind of encourage them to draw out the comb. But when you already have that honey flow going, if you were to feed them sugar syrup, wouldn't they just plug all the open comb that they have?
Yes. And then you have sugar syrup honey, which somebody actually entered in unknowingly at the Nebraska State Fair last year, and you can definitely tell the difference.
Awesome.
We call it very, 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 very light category honey.
Oops.
Okay, so like always, Randall, will you put the email list on? And I think we are recording, right? Yeah, it looks like we're recording. And then do we have a link for the recording from last time?
Let me check. I believe so.
Yeah, okay.
Judy, we do have a couple of questions in the chat. One person asked if it's possible to put a super on too soon.
Are you talking about like a drawn super or
It doesn't say. I'm guessing undrawn. Yeah, undrawn.
I think some new beekeepers often can be over ambitious, and it really depends on the location. So in Minnesota, with Gary Reuter and beekeeping in Minnesota, we could throw on 4 supers at a time, and the bees would just go at it. But sometimes, depending on where you are, the resources aren't that plentiful, and you throw on 3 supers, and then you just triple the space in that colony, and then they have a hard time thermoregulating it because they just aren't big enough yet to really work those supers. So in that case, you can put on too many supers too early. But if it's undrawn and you need them to draw out the wax, putting it on earlier is better because they have to draw it out and then they have to put it in. So it's all circumstantial. And unfortunately, you can't say this is when you do things and this is how you do it. It all depends.
Judy, I guess I've kind of heard that essentially, once the box, that your top box is, maybe 3/4 full, then you want to add another one. Because I've heard if you add too many boxes too soon, it's hard for them to kind of keep out pests like small hive beetles and wax moths. Would you say that's correct?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, and it really is dependent on where you are because, sometimes we say don't put out too much equipment, but in Minnesota's case, and even this year, and Dustin, you should let them know, but in Luke, you can contest. We put out like 2-3 supers and they're almost full now. And that was what, a week ago?
Yeah, I would say when there's a good honey flow and they're getting started, you could probably put on a couple of supers if they're getting going on it.
Yeah. Okay, so Rando's got the email list on there, and then we wanted to see if people were able to catch the virtual bee fun day. And Randall, what did you think? What did you like? Speakers?
I mean, all of them were good. Like, I learned a little bit more about things you can do with wax. I watched the candle making one. Priyanka's presentation was also very good. Priyanka Chakrabarti Basu. Yeah, it was pretty interesting there was a lot. Judy, you packed a lot in there. But okay, sorry, what did you?
That was really impressive. You were able to say her whole name. Like I have trouble. I get to Priya. That's all I can say.
There's
I call her Priya.
There's someone on NPR, Magna Chakrabarti, and so maybe since I hear her say her name all the time.
Yeah.
And then I had a professor, Basu, in college, so yeah.
I always stumble, after in her first name, and she's like, Judy, it's okay, just Priya. Priya's fine.
I unfortunately didn't get to see, there were a few that I wanted to catch that I wasn't able to because I was setting up for my demo. So I didn't get to see like Dewey Karen. I caught the tail end of Dewey Karen's talk.
Yeah.
But I thought that would have been interesting.
Yeah, and Dewey Karen's talk is very interesting because some beekeepers find it controversial and some beekeepers are like, yeah, that's totally right. When he's talking about extinction and the struggles with honeybees, yeah, I've heard his talk before at other conferences, and I've heard beekeepers like that that argument that, you know, honeybees are not in danger of extinction, and that this is just another one of those waves, versus other folks that be like, no, it's different this time. This is different than the other, you know, incidences. What are your guys' take on that?
I guess I didn't see the presentation, so I don't.
There was a section of his talk where he's talking about just extinction and honeybee extinction and the concerns for bees dying off. And he makes very valid points that there's been a lot of, you know, historical waves of pathogens or problems that beekeepers have just kind of, you know, been able to overcome with their resilience and their ability to kind of split hives and keep inventory up. And, you know, it's really from the beekeeper's feet. But, you know, some beekeepers that listen to that talk think that, you know, he's diminishing the decline or the issues or the struggles of the beekeepers right now, or the honeybee die-offs now. And that they argue, no, I've been a beekeeper for 30, 40 years. I was there. I saw Varroa come in. I saw, you know, this is different. So there's, you know, I didn't know what other people felt about that part of the talk.
Yeah, I didn't realize he was so controversial.
He's not. He's not. He does a lot of really good basic practical management. I think it's just that one point where he's like, it's okay, calm down, guys. It's all right. Because I think they emphasize, I think there's a lot of hype in the, what do they call it? The bee apocalypse. Mm-hmm. And now it's the insect apocalypse, and that, you know, there's these doomsday revelations. I think he was trying to calm people a little bit. Yeah.
Right.
Are the recorded sessions available online yet? I missed most of it just because the weather was so nice. Oh, and Randall, my 7-year-old was watching your presentation while I was driving. She thought you were boring until you started doing the sugar shake, and she loved that.
Good. I'm glad. But how do we find those videos?
Sheldon is working with the IT folks right now. So because we are not webmasters and with no idea, that's not our realm. He took all the recordings and is working, and it's in their, I guess, desktop or whatever. It's in their realm, and they're uploading it up now. I don't know what their deadline is or when they're going to get it loaded. But there was a lot of data, and so the recordings are quite large. So we'll see how long it takes them to upload all those.
And then will we just be able to log in to the Great Plains Master Beekeeper, and then it'll be under resources, or I think
it's going to be under recordings, or it's going to be in the members, you know, like you have to be a member, but membership is free. And then I think Sheldon could be, will clarify which tab, but he said it was going to be under members resources or something like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Looking through the comments, someone's mentioning Brad Metz's talk on pheromones was really good.
Yeah, his talk was really interesting. I hadn't thought about all the different nuances of pheromones, because a lot of times we teach the main ones, and you know, all the nuances of these chemical signaling is much more complicated and much more complex, but certainly we don't dive into that a lot when we teach.
Well, I like that he made the point about how difficult it is to research because of the quantities of pheromone that are normally used. So if you douse a bee in a pheromone and another bee comes across them, they'll just think it's weird because it's in such an irregular. Anyway, it was something I hadn't thought about before.
Yeah. Yeah, and it certainly kind of emphasizes the fact that a lot of times people like ourselves, we don't like to over smoke the colonies, and there is something to be said about overwhelming all the smells that are normally controlling things in the hive.
Yeah. And then there's a question to me about whether or not I think sugar rolls are accurate. I mean, as I demonstrated live, we weren't able to find any mites with the sugar shake. Maybe I didn't let it sit for long enough. Maybe I didn't let it sit for a full 2 minutes, or maybe if I'd let it sit a little bit longer in the shade after I covered them with sugar, we would have seen a few more mites out of there. But as far as a pretty fast response and a little, at least slightly more accurate, maybe might come from an alcohol wash or an ether roll. And Judy, you mentioned that there's some studies that have done comparisons before and found that the sugar shake is a little less accurate.
Yeah, yeah. So the alcohol and the ether seem to be more accurate in the sense that there's less give in mishandling or like a user mistakes, because like the sugar rolls, you have to roll it and then you have to let the bees sit in the jar, and they have to have enough time to thermoregulate and agitate their muscles to create heat, and that heat like drops the mites down. Some people constantly roll it, and so if you're constantly rolling the jar, they're not generating the heat that they need to dislodge the mites, and then the mites don't come off. The other thing I noticed about the sugar roll jars is that if on a really humid day, or if you're like us, we don't wash out the jars every time, the sugar starts to cake on, and then sometimes the mite sticks to the jars, and you're getting, not all the mites are coming out. They're sticking to the edges of the bottoms. So that can also contribute to inaccuracy.
There could be some things that are problematic about it, but it is just a small part of a bigger picture. Whenever you're monitoring for mites, you might not need to know the exact number of mites per 100 of bees that you have. There's a lot of other considerations. So if you have a general idea of how many mites there are, you can take that into consideration along with the time of year it is. Are you planning on harvesting honey anytime soon? Things like that, because there is no exact agreed upon established threshold for treating for mites. Right. It really just comes down to, okay, are there mites? Are there a lot? Can I treat right now and not affect my honey? Those other considerations as well. So I think that it could still be used. If it's something that's going to get people that don't want to kill their bees to monitor for mites, I still see it as an effective tool.
The other thing I like is that for new beekeepers, one, they don't want to kill their bees, but two, they don't know how to sample the bees very well either. And so this is a really nice way for them to practice how to get the bees into the jars and to be efficient with it without killing your queen, without, injuring your bees. And then once you start, being able to sample your bees very easily, or being able to recognize your queen, you're potentially less likely to scoop her into your alcohol jar. There's no coming back from that.
No.
A lot of new beekeepers just aren't aware, and the chances of sampling the queen is slim, but it does happen.
Yeah, and I've seen people pull their frames out too fast, the first frames that they pull out, and just smush a queen. Taking that first frame out. Yeah. Sometimes you're just unlucky. She's unlucky.
Anybody else see the virtual fun day and thought that there were really outstanding talks or topics that they thought were interesting?
I thought it was great overall. I thought it was a really impressive effort, good roster of people, and that's with skipping out on half of it. So who knows what I missed. I guess I personally, I enjoyed the crafty stuff just because I've been curious about that and haven't been exposed to a whole lot of it. But I certainly picked up some good beekeeping information and a few quotable fun facts and that kind of thing. Is the survey still live? Because I haven't done that. You sent out a survey link, right?
It probably is.
I'll try it.
Yeah, Sheldon is on trying to take a vacation this weekend, so I would assume that it's still live. I let him take a break. Let's see. We had some. Oh yeah, Patrick says you like Priya a lot, and that was really cool. I thought she did a really good job explaining a really complicated subject, and that was difficult to do because a lot of times, there's just all these terms and jargons and components and phrases that are just really complicated. But I think she did a really good job. I wanted to see more about her fungicide research, but I think she was holding back a little bit because they're still ongoing. But yeah, so much stuff going on at OSU. It's a lot of cool stuff. Okay, Randall, did you want to? I think you have some stuff to share, right?
Yeah. I can go ahead and share my screen. If I can remember how to do that.
Yeah, there were USDA folks. Mike had poor audio, but but they had some really cool, interesting stuff. I'm really excited to try to get some polyline bees out to the Midwest.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, their talk was interesting from Louisiana.
Yeah.
We did have a couple of questions in the comments.
I missed it. I don't think was recorded. What were some of the highlights from that one?
Oh, the USDA ones. So there was 3 USDA researchers, and 2 of them kind of shared a slot and talked about their research on developing the poly A line bees, which are varroa resistant and really bred for longevity and features that promote longevity or long-lived bees. And that is many of these physiological traits and features that they kind of research. One of them was also looking a lot further into propolis research and digging more into the effects of promoting propolis for social immunity and social health. And then Frank was looking at amitraz resistance and better understanding how amitraz, this varroa compound that a lot of commercial beekeepers use, it's a synthetic compound. It stays in the comb, and beekeepers are starting to report that they're becoming less and less effective at controlling mites. And so he's looking at that varroa resistance and just building up why that resistance is occurring and how we're studying it. It's kind of difficult to map. But that was the USDA folks. Yeah, and I don't think their talks were, many of the research folks can't have their research prematurely published anywhere if they want to publish it in a paper. So that's why they don't have it recorded.
Okay. I know there's some questions in the chat, but I thought maybe we could do those towards the end.
Yeah, that sounds good.
So I've been at Iowa State since October 2017, and starting in January 2018 and all the way through January of this year, I conducted a survey with beekeepers, farmers, and landowners whenever I gave presentations. So I would present our research that we were conducting and have now completed, focused on the impact of landscape on honeybee health. So we had hives at agricultural sites in the middle of soybean fields, and we had hives at prairies. And we noticed that there was somewhat of a rescue effect when we moved the hives from the soybean site, especially after soybean was done flowering, to the prairie site. We saw them put on more weight and have more stores going into the winter. So I would present this information and then give a general survey to kind of see the pulse of what people's thoughts were about their bees and beekeeping in Iowa, what some of their practices are, and whether or not the information I communicated to them affected their interest in landscape and things like that affecting their hives. So I just thought I would click through. I think there's 15 slides I'm just now going through the data, which has just been like a big spreadsheet. And I've just now this past week been making these graphs. So I don't know, I thought I would share them because I think they're interesting and maybe people will have some comments about them. Can people see that? This one is asking, oops. Do you currently use DriftWatch, BeeCheck, or FieldWatch to register your apiary? Now, in Iowa, it's different because that's our state apiary registry. So there is an incentive for people to register their hives with the state by putting them on DriftWatch. But I thought this data was interesting. Here's the same question, but I put it in percentages. So about 66%, I think that there was almost 200 responses. I think there was like 190 responses, and this is just Beekeeper data. So out of that 190 people, about 2/3 of them were registered, almost exactly 2/3 were registered on DriftWatch, and only 1/3 didn't have their hives registered, which was a little bit surprising because when they announced that the new registry for the state would be the DriftWatch BeeCheck website, there was a lot of pushback against it. But it seems like most of the people, at least the people I presented to, seem to be utilizing it. This was asking, do you find the BeeCheck DriftWatch website useful? And it was kind of across the board. No, not that many people found it not useful at all. But it seemed like people seemed to think it was somewhat useful to very useful across the board. So it's something that overall people find at least somewhat helpful.
Randall, what were they using it for? Or how are they using it?
So people can register their hives on the website. And so what it does is it basically presents a Google Maps, and you drop a pin where your hives are. And that way, commercial pesticide applicators can go on and see if there's hives nearby where they're planning on spraying. And so it's a tool for increasing communication between commercial pesticide applicators and beekeepers. But it's also a useful tool, say, if I'm a beekeeper and I'm looking for a good spot to keep my hives, I can see if there's a lot of other hives registered in the same region, in the same mile radius.
So are these people who are using it or consider it useful getting contacted by the sprayers and landowners? That was one question I always was wondering, was how many beekeepers actually get contacted by someone using DriftWatch or FieldWatch?
Well, if it's a commercial pesticide applicator and someone is registered within a mile radius of where they want to spray, the law says that they have to get in touch. And so depending on where you have your hives, you may or may not be contacted. And I've talked to a lot of people that have been contacted, but not everybody so far. So I think it just depends on where your hives are. All right. Oh yeah, do you have a question?
No, it looks like Jennifer just had a comment that she said she tried to register her hives, but since she only had 3, she was told that she didn't qualify to register. Do you have a minimum number of hives that you need in Iowa? I think that's a rule for Nebraska.
No, I think that's a Nebraska rule. And again, Iowa's different because it is the state registry. So. And
the difference in Nebraska is that it's not a mandatory thing, it's a voluntary thing, which also means that it's voluntary that the applicators, kind of use it to notify. they're not,
right.
Yeah, they're useful tools. It's not a registry though.
Whereas here, there's a law that says you can't spray if you're within a mile of a hive. These were the reasons why people don't use it for the people that answered that they didn't register their hives. And the majority of them just didn't know about it. So I thought that was pretty interesting. And then the second highest column was other. And most of the responses in the other section were, I'm just lazy and haven't gotten around to doing it yet. So I thought that was pretty funny. But yeah, so I saw this as maybe a sign of success as a result of my presentations, that maybe people who didn't realize in Iowa that didn't realize that this was an option for them found out about it. This question was, the response was, I rent my hives for pollination purposes. So this is for people who use their hives, rent them out for pollination. And the majority of people, only 10 of the people I surveyed of the almost 200 did that. So the majority of these people, and I think on the next slide you can see the number of I'm not sure where my slide is. I have a slide that says how many people, how many hives they say that they have. And the majority of people had between 1 and 10 hives. So it makes sense that they're not renting them out for pollination purposes. This was to get at a question we had, since we saw improved forage when we moved our hives to a prairie site. I wanted to know if that was something that any other beekeepers did, or if they mostly kept them at their same site. And yeah, the majority kept their hives at the same site throughout the year. So here we go. I leave my hives at the same location year round. Pretty much everybody said yes. A small group said no, because this one, I moved my hives to overwinter at a different location. I think that that was the majority of the reason to move hives, was to find a better overwintering location, not to improve forage availability. And then we asked them, how important is it to you to move your hives? Is this something that you'd be interested in doing? And pretty much everyone said no. This was, I thought, really interesting. Please indicate your level of concern with the following sources of stress for honeybees. So we had 3 different sources of stress we talked about. The blue is insecticides, the orange is pathogens, varroa and viruses, and the gray is poor forage. So if you look at the very concerned, it looks like a large group of people are very concerned about varroa and other pathogens, and also very concerned about insecticides. Forage tends to be the, what was that?
Nobody is not concerned with mites.
Which is good, right?
Yes.
And there's a few people not concerned about forage, and 3 people not concerned about insecticides. Well, overall, I was happy to see that there's no column that they're concerned about all 3, because all 3 are really important factors to overall hive health. But the majority of people are moderately or very concerned about these 3 pathogens. And I'll probably try to dig into that data a little deeper to parse out some of what to them is maybe the most important thing. But
it'd be really interesting to see like what this response is, outside of our group that we program, like this might be an attestment to your programming and your education on varroa monitoring and testing and IPM, whereas other people might not think varroa is really that big of an issue. That'd be interesting to see if there's some control group outside of your program,
Right, and I would be really interested to see, because they took this survey right after I did a big presentation that was basically about the importance of forage. So I would be interested to see if people were interested in flowers or were concerned about flowers prior, if they hadn't seen my presentation. But yeah, I thought this was one of the questions I was most excited about seeing the data from, for sure. In my corresponding surveys where I asked farmers and landowners how they would rate their level, or how important to them pollinator conservation is, every single person responded either somewhat important or very important. There were no farmers and no landowners that said, no, this isn't important to me. It was all on the very important or extremely important end. So I thought that was cool too. Here's the number of hives. How many hives do you typically manage in the summer? So the overwhelming majority of people are managing 1 to 2 or 3 to 10 hives. So the majority of the people, I think that says that the majority of people that were coming to my talk were backyard beekeepers. Not so much, we had a handful of sidelines, and I think that there was one person that had 1,000 hives. But out of the 200 people I surveyed, the vast majority were backyard beekeepers with 1 to 10. And we asked them to identify the habitat around where they place their hives. So we're in the Midwest, we're in Iowa, so 50% is corn and soybean. Only 16% were near prairie, and then a few near fruit crops and a few near forest. But I thought that this was pretty interesting to see in terms of learning a little bit more about where people choose to place their hives.
What would the other be? What are some examples of other?
Yeah, that was my question too, Andy.
Backyard.
Is that residential?
Backyard was one of them. I would have to look at it again. I'm not sure, but I remember seeing backyard a couple times.
Would pasture fall into prairie?
No, I think some people, I want to say some people wrote pasture. I'm not sure, but yeah, people might put pasture.
And Rick has a question about whether prairie is a good place to put hives.
So our research shows that prairie provides a pretty consistent level of forage throughout the year due to the fact that it has some flowers that bloom in the early spring and some that bloom in the late fall, and it has a high diversity of flowers blooming throughout the season. So it is a good resource, especially in those tough times like early spring and late fall, when you're pretty hard pressed to find other places where there's floral resources for your bees.
Yeah, and we had a graduate student looking at the prairie corridor system out here in Lincoln. So that's the 12-mile stretch, or is it 18 miles? They purchased this stretch of property from Spring Creek Audubon all the way down to Pioneers Park. And they bought up a bunch of property, some of it private and some of it public, and they started restoring pieces of it. And her research was looking at like remnant prairie versus restored prairie. And this is Jennifer's question, is what is CRP considered? And she found that remnant prairie, or prairie that has kind of been kept pristine and managed well, actually provides a lot of really good spring early forage. Whereas restored prairies and some of the newer plant mixes in these CRPs are providing a lot of mid to late summer forage. And so that there's this kind of really interesting resource allocation depending on how you manage your landscape and what you're managing it for. So yeah, there's a lot of people who are restoring prairie. There's a lot of people who are putting their cropland into some sort of pasture or CRP. And I think they're all kind of a little bit blended. Prairie, pasture, CRP, it's all kind of forage habitat. And it all depends on what's seeded.
Yeah. And I think that's interesting you bring it up, comparing remnant prairie to like CRP, for example, new reestablished prairie. When you compare, one of our research projects here at Iowa State from Dr. Ga Jiang was looking at the Prairie Strips program, which is now a CRP program. It's CP43. And the idea is that you establish strips of prairie either across your field or adjacent to your field. And GA placed hives at sites with prairie strips and sites without prairie strips. So this, of course, is agricultural land, corn and soybean sites. And we saw significant increases in hive mass and honey production at the sites where there was prairie strips present. So I guess it depends on what you're comparing it to as well.
Yeah, and it's really weird because those people who are going into CRP, there's like different programs that you can choose. And so you would want to work with your NRC partner to really work with what seed mix works and what works with your budget and your land type. But we also found that the CP42 mix is specific for honeybees, but it's really expensive because it has a lot of really rare plant species. So other beekeepers have opted to use the wild game mix. which has a really nice assortment of wildflowers that would still be really good for the pollinators, but the focus was on improving game and like bird species, which rely on insects. So it was all the same, but the price tag was way different.
That's interesting. And I just put out like an article on the extension website about keeping bees in CRP. And I put an emphasis on the pollinator one, which is CP42, the pollinator focused planting. But I think that's cool that you mentioned that sometimes the wildlife one might be more affordable and just as effective.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly doesn't have as much of the species that the pollinator mix like provides, but it does have a really good assortment. And most of them are all pollinator friendly. There's a few grasses in there, but
yeah. And a good note in what my article was kind of highlighting was the fact that, so with CRP land, you can't graze livestock on it, but they do want to promote putting bees on CRP land. So USDA kind of made a declaration a few years ago saying, sure, come bring your bees on here. So that's exciting. So if there is someone that has CRP established near you, it's totally fine to put bees there if of course, if the landowner is willing.
Do you guys have in Iowa, do you guys have the Pheasants Forever subsidy program?
We have something similar, yeah. I want to say it's called Prairie Partners, and they do it with the Department of Natural Resources. It's a seed cost share. And then there's also the Bee and Butterfly Habitat Fund that'll do cost share. And
do they reach Iowa?
Yes, it's here. And the people who started it are family beekeepers from Idaho that are friends with my dad. Anyway, it's a, but
yeah. And on the Pheasants Forever question, Iowa, it's kind of a county by county what individual chapters do with cost share. Also, I can speak for Powesheik County in that regard.
Oh, I guess I didn't realize it was different county by county. Good to know. But I sometimes do give presentations with the people from Pheasants Forever, the field biologists, and I always refer people to them that are interested in establishing habitat. All right, I'll keep going with this. So then I started to ask people kind of their opinions about the following kind of prairie habitat related items. So the question here at the bottom is, I have access to prairie habitat. And it kind of increased on its way up, but it seemed like the majority of people somewhat agreed or strongly agreed that they already had access to prairie habitat, or at least maybe their bees were in a place that they could, within a mile or two, reach prairie habitat. So that's pretty interesting to see that people tend to lean more towards saying, yeah, my bees have access to prairie. This question is, moving my hives to prairie habitat would be very challenging. And for the most part, people didn't really agree or disagree, or they somewhat agreed it would be challenging. I think what this is telling me is people probably don't want to move their hives to habitat to take advantage of the flowers in the late fall. So that's good information to know. I feel my hives have adequate access to forage. So the majority of people somewhat agree or strongly agree. So people seem to already feel pretty confident in their hive placement and their selection of hive sites. And that's it.
So Randall, there was a couple questions. What's like an average honey production for some of these beekeepers in Iowa?
How much honey are they producing? Well, judging by the fact that most of the people that filled out the survey had 1 to 10 hives. It's mostly backyard beekeepers, maybe a handful of people that would sell at a farmer's market or a local store. But I think that for the most part, it's just people producing honey for themselves and their friends and their family, at least the people in this survey. I think that's something I can say pretty confidently.
So yeah, because I was curious, I mean, the question might differ or the responses might differ depending on whether you're talking to a honey producer or, a backyard beekeeper, because you might be hidden for, a 4 super load or
Right.
yeah, or not that worried about honey production. Therefore, the landscape's not that, that much of a concern, I guess.
Right. People maybe are more interested in it for the hobby of it rather
For
than
survival, not
Yeah.
for honey production. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. And maybe one thing I could do as a follow-up as I continue parsing out this data would be to send a similar data to a handful of the commercial beekeepers that we have here in Iowa. Because I mean, there's about almost 5,000 registered apiaries, registered beekeepers in Iowa. But in terms of commercial, there's probably, I don't know, 20 to 30, especially the really big commercial folks that have thousands of hives and send them out to California every year. There's probably less than 20. And I guess that can also inform the type of extension I'm giving, right? Because this really shows that people come to my presentations are more the backyard crowd. Yeah, that's an interesting point though. These people aren't trying to produce honey to make a living.
Yeah, and Mark wanted to know how many of these people are from the middle of a large city. He says that our hives are all in the middle of Omaha, a few blocks from a very large Elmwood Park that has a lot of white Dutch clover. How does production from city hives compare to rural hives? And beekeeping in our backyard is fun in the middle of Omaha, but it would be more fun if we got enough honey to sell. Good point, yeah.
I do have data on county data. So all the responses are tied to the person put where they're. It's an anonymous survey, but people put what counties they're from. And I think that there was only maybe one or two counties that were represented that were major metropolitan areas. So people from the county where Des Moines is, and people from the county where Waterloo is. But I think that the majority of the responses were from more rural areas, certainly not cities like Omaha.
Yeah, I've always wondered that too. I guess I have mixed feelings about residential and rural areas because it really depends. There was a couple of studies that talked about even within a residential area, there are pockets of neighborhoods that might have more forage and pockets of neighborhoods that may be very careful about lawn maintenance and dandelion maintenance. So there's even within a residential area, there's little pockets of these hot spots where there's a lot of good forage and then some that offer very little.
Right. Iowans, I don't know about Nebraska, but Iowans love to mow their lawns. They love a manicured lawn, and they love manicured lawn around their fields too, on the roadsides. So,
my neighbor mows 3 times a week. 3 times.
I hate mowing lawns, so I don't get it. But there is somewhat of a movement to try to leave things growing in ditches and things like that to provide more forage for bees and also increase milkweed production for the monarch corridor. So there's a lot of benefits to that. But I think, yeah, that would be a whole nother conversation to have. What actually is available in rural residential areas or even in these farm areas with really manicured roadsides.
And I always tell beekeepers, because it's so such a complex and mosaic of the landscape, don't worry about what your eyes are telling you. Worry about what your bees are telling you. And so even if you are in a rural area and you are worried about corn and soy and lots of chemicals, if your bees are producing brood with lots and lots of brood food like this, it's telling me that they're getting plenty of brood care. So you could be in a residential area and you think that there's lots and lots of pretty flowers around, but it's actually offering very little nutrition or very little diversity of nutrition, which case you're going to not see a lot of well-fed larvae like this. So take a look at how well the brood food is sitting underneath that larvae, especially the young ones. And there's a question about what happens if you don't see a lot of eggs, and just consider that there's a lot of swarming going on. And so if your colony is getting ramped up and building in size, sometimes the queens will slow down in egg laying and in preparation for swarming. Alternatively, if you have had a swarm and your queen has just been requeened and remated, or not remated, but mated, and she might just be ramping up in her egg laying, and on the front end of that, she might have some spotty or sporadic egg laying that might indicate, oh my goodness, she's a poor laying queen, but that might just be she's a brand new queen and she's just starting to get going. So we've seen a lot of that this week in our yards, is a lot of colonies with a lot of empty brood and just a couple of eggs here and there. And then we're seeing a lot of these really young or small queens, just, you know, just from requeening.
Judy, I do have a couple of questions in the chat. I thought I'd bring up. So Rachel, she asked or commented, she said, we checked our hive today and there's no evidence of a queen, no brood or eggs. Seems like fewer bees than we started with. Would you encourage her, suggest for her to get a queen or order a queen, or see if she could get like a frame of eggs, or what would you suggest in that situation?
Yeah, I mean, she says she has no eggs or few eggs.
It says no brood or eggs and no queen.
Yeah, and it could be that she's in the middle of that swarming where the queen is out mating or hasn't started laying. If she has another colony, what we do is we put a frame of eggs in that colony to see that, you know, if they are queen right, then they aren't going to build any queen cells out of that frame. But if they are indeed queenless or have lost a queen, they'll rapidly use those eggs and start replacing the queen, and you'll know.
Thanks. And then the next question is from Mark. He asks, checking hives today, I've found a hive that had capped brood with holes on the top some. I'm not sure what is going on. Any ideas?
I mean,
Probably almost need a picture of that, huh?
Yeah, I mean, there could be a couple things. Perforated cells can sometimes indicate bees are hygienically removing brood. And sometimes it can indicate varroa infection. Sometimes it can indicate disease. It kind of depends on what else they're seeing. Are they seeing like sunken cells and discolored larvae? Are they seeing varroa, deformed wings? Randall, what do you think?
Yeah,
Mark says he has a pic. If Mark, can you share your screen if you have a picture of it?
As I say, I thought that comment Dustin made on Facebook today about bald brood was interesting also.
Yep.
Bald brood.
Yep. So yeah, it kind of makes a trail, huh? So sometimes you see bald brood like this, and they're hygienically removing it because of varroa sometimes. But sometimes you see this, and it's making a clear trail, and they're actually sensing a larva, a wax larva underneath, tunneling the brood cells there, and they're uncapping the brood, trying to get to that. So sometimes bald brood like that is you've got a loose wax larva running around there, and then sometimes it's something else. But it certainly looks like bald brood. They're hygienically removing that brood.
So they're detecting something, probably varroa.
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely check just to rule out varroa and make sure that varroa isn't an issue. And if it is just a larva, you know, wax moth larva, they're strong enough. It looks like they're getting at it. I did show a picture. I don't know if anybody recognized it. We had a question about, we had a laying worker, and the question was, how do you deal with a laying worker colony? I don't know if other people have dealt with it. Some people call them helplessly hopelessly lost. You know, they're hopelessly queenless because they're basically, what happens is that you have had no queen in your colony for such a long time that the workers start developing their ovaries and start laying eggs. So you could have one or multiple false queens in the hive that really resemble a worker and are moving around laying eggs, but only producing drones. And so if you introduce a new queen, those workers are under the assumption that they are queen right and will kill the new queen because they're not allied with it. They're policing other non, nest mates. So what we've done, and it's kind of annoying and laborsome, but it has worked before, is we actually put the queen excluder down on the bottom board, and then we shake all the frames and bees out of the hive. We put the frames back in, and then we reassemble it. So basically, the queen or the false queens have such swollen ovaries and abdomens, they wouldn't be able to go up into the excluder back into the hive, allowing that colony to be queenless again. And then I go in there, move the bottom box and move the box, and then just kind of squish all the bees down there. And then I can requeen it.
And this has been effective for you?
Yeah. I only have to do it once or twice, and I wouldn't do it to a large colony, but yeah, we've done it a few times.
Oh, that's great.
So I also turned the hive too. So this is a colony that is now facing the opposite direction. So foragers have to take a little bit longer time to find the colony. So you can see they're kind of working their way through the cracks. But all the other bees I shake out in the front, and they have to crawl through the queen excluder up back into it. And then later I can requeen it. Or just give them some eggs and let them rear their own queen.
Somewhere I'd heard that those false queens can't fly, so if you take them 100 yards away and shake them out, and I've done that before and introduced new brood with eggs and that kind of thing, and I think it's worked. I've done it a few times and I don't remember the end results.
Yeah, their abdomens are swollen. The only reason why I didn't shake this out further was because they had a lot of brood that was emerging, and they're all young. So I wanted them to be able to come back into the hive, which is why I said when I come back and requeen, I'm taking the hive and I'm repositioning the bottom board, and all the bees on the underside get squished because they're not going back into the hive.
My beekeeping mentor would just fill a bucket with soapy water and go frame by frame and just dip the whole hive in there. Just get rid of it and use the equipment for another hive. That's how I was taught.
Yeah, and I've also had beekeepers that have just shaken the bees out in the yard and then just let them do what they're, let the ones go back and return. But then you're still left with a lot of frames of resources, and this colony still had some worker brood because we were kind of trying to requeen it. So there's still resources we didn't want to just leave.
Right. I've done that too, where I've got multiple yards. I'll shake them out and let them join the hives there, and then take those frames and use them as resources at another yard to make splits or something.
Yeah.
I've had success where I have a laying worker, and it's also swarm season. So then I'll find a colony that's getting ready to swarm, and I will take the frames that have the swarm cells and cap brood out and give that to the laying worker colony, because the brood puts off a pheromone as well. And then with them having the queen cells in there as well, it seems to take care of the issue. I've also had it where I've had a laying worker, there's a ton of eggs in the cell, and I've given a couple frames of cap brood and a frame of open brood, and then introduced a new queen. And that's knocked the laying worker out too. And I didn't have to shake bees out of the package or out of the box.
Sorry, I just noticed it was 6 o'clock, so I just have 2 more pictures. This is just a really fun picture of beautiful brood and a queen cell. And it was fully intact queen cell, but then I looked in and it was like chewed out from the very top down. I totally thought that there was somebody home because it was still sealed at the bottom. And then I turned it around and was like, oh, that thing's empty. I just thought that was really funny. Usually it's chewed out from the sides, and this one was straight down. Anyways, I didn't have anything else. Randall, did you have any? I know that there's probably some more chat comments, questions.
Yeah, maybe we can do one more question and then call it a day.
I'm talking to Rachel on the Facebook page, but she's in here. Rachel, you want to unmute yourself and you want to tell us any more about your queenless colony?
Well, I'm just so sad. I don't know what to do. Am I on?
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, well, like I told you guys, my kids love checking the hive, and I finally told them they had to knock that stuff off. And so I think the last time I checked was the week we found the cockroaches and stuff in there, and everything seemed to look good. And then we checked, I noticed that it didn't seem like there was much action around the hive, you know, because usually you see them coming and going and everything. And so I said, well, we'll get in there today. So we looked, and there's no eggs, no larvae. There's still a few bees, you know, doing honey and everything. And there were a few cells where it looked like a bee tried to emerge, but like died in the cell. It looked fully developed. And then it looked like maybe an almost queen cell, but I don't know. I'm so sad. So that's all I know. They were there.
Do you just have the one hive?
I just have the one, and so I don't have anything to swap from or take from or add from, and so.
Where are you located?
South of Lincoln.
Oh, you're in Lincoln. Ah.
Ish.
Maybe you can come by and grab some frames of brood.
You think?
just to help that colony out a little bit, and
Yeah.
then you can just bring back we'll leave a nuke out for you with some brood, and then you just put it in your colony and then bring back the nuke.
Okay. Sing them some songs.
Will you email us? Just email us, and we'll connect. Because you're in town and we can help you.
Yeah. Darn it. Here I tell them, leave those bees alone, and now it's like they're gone.
Oh, it's okay. It might just be that they swarmed, so
yeah,
we want to encourage it, and it should be a good, fun experience. So you're in town, we can help you. Just let us know.
Okay, we'll do that.
I put my email in the chat, Rachel.
Okay, thanks, Dustin.
In the Facebook chat. So just email me. I'll set something up.
Okay, cool. Yeah, my kids are going to zoo camp next week, so I'm wide open. I'm like, they're going to be gone, but now I'm like, well, what do I do alone?
Yeah, we can tell you how to get to our yard, and we'll send out a nuke for you to help with the hive.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Okay. All right, thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Good to see you.
Bye.
Bye, thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.